Picture this. A launch pad in Florida, Earth under harsh floodlights, and the moon overhead like a silent judge that never blinks. Commander Mara Vance is on site because some risks do not show up on a screen until it is almost too late. Everything looks routine at first, which is exactly what makes it unsettling. A number drifts, a message arrives, a question gets asked in the wrong tone, and suddenly the mission is not only about engineering. This is a story about pressure, permissions, and the kind of control that never needs to raise its voice. Stay with Mara through the first signs, because once the trap has a shape, it is already moving. Let's start. 2 hours before the final fueling call, floodlights turned the launch pad into a white island against the humid Florida darkness. Beyond it was Earth, loud and alive, and far above it was the moon, silent, indifferent, waiting. Commander Mara Vance stood at the edge of the service road and watched vapor drift from the ground lines. The air smelled like wet concrete and metal warmed by lamps, and her job for the next few hours was simple in words and brutal in practice. Get the vehicle through rehearsal. Keep the crew schedule intact. Do not let a small leak become a story that eats the whole mission. She wore a plain white badge and a jacket that looked like anyone else's on the pad. If you did not know her face, you would take her for a supervisor with a long day ahead, and her real authority sat in a secure room a few hundred meters away, waiting for the moment she had to use it. Systems Chief Juno Hart approached with a tablet pressed to her chest. Her hair was tucked under a cap, and her eyes stayed on the piping like it might speak. Juno said, "Commander, we are seeing a pressure drift on the hydrogen side. It is small, but it is not behaving like a normal temperature swing." Mara did not look away from the fog. "Show me." Juno held the tablet up, and the numbers rolled in smooth lines, too smooth for something that was supposed to be messy. Mara took one slow breath and handed the tablet back. Mara said, "We do not pause everything yet. We isolate the line, and we verify with a second sensor path." Juno nodded. "Understood." A tall man in a gray field jacket walked up behind them, boots crunching on grit. Security liaison Cade Rourke looked like he belonged near fences and doors, not rockets. Cade said, "I can lock down the pad routes now, limit movement, and make sure nobody touches anything they should not." Mara finally turned her head, her eyes flat and focused. "Do it quietly, no panic, and I want calm bodies doing their jobs." Cade gave a short nod and walked off, already speaking into his headset. Mara watched him go, then looked back at the lines and valves. Mara said, "Juno, bring me Flight Surgeon Dr. Elian Cross." Juno blinked once. "Medical?" Mara said, "Medical. If someone is trying to force a schedule change, they might target the person who can declare a human unfit." Juno did not ask questions, and she jogged toward the access stairs. Mara stayed where she was under the harsh lights, while the vapor kept drifting like a quiet warning. The fueling operation started on time, because it always started on time until it did not. Pumps came alive under the pad, and the ground crew moved with practiced confidence that hid the weight of consequences. Mara walked the perimeter with Cade at her shoulder. He kept his eyes on hands, pockets, doors, and faces, and she kept her eyes on systems and patterns. A line of technicians passed them, pushing a cart of tools and sealant. One of them had a badge clip that did not swing the right way, like it had been pinned on in a hurry. Mara noticed and filed it away without changing her pace. Cade noticed too, and he spoke low. Cade said, "That badge clip looks fresh. Want me to pull him?" Mara said, "Not yet. If he runs, he leads us to more than himself." Cade made a sound that meant agreement without enthusiasm. A moment later, Juno returned with Flight Surgeon Dr. Elian Cross. Elian moved fast but not frantic, the way medical people do when they know panic is contagious. He stopped beside Mara and looked past her toward the lines. Elian said, "Commander Vance, Juno said you wanted me on the pad." Mara said, "I want you close. If this turns into a schedule fight, they will try to use you." Elian glanced at the lines, then at the faces. This is about the leak. Mara said, it is about control. The leak is just the lever. Elian studied her for a second, and his voice softened. You look like you have already decided. Mara said, I decide early. It saves time. Juno stepped closer, eyes locked on her screen. Second sensor path confirms drift, and the math is clean, too clean, like a controlled release through a tiny engineered channel. Mara felt her jaw tighten. A design, not a mistake. Cade spoke into his headset, then looked up. Pad routes are locked, and anyone leaving this zone has to go through my people. Mara nodded once. Good. Juno, isolate the line segment and inspect every flange and coupling, no theatrics, just work. Juno hesitated. If we isolate, we lose time. Mara met her eyes. If we do not isolate, we lose the mission. Juno swallowed and turned away, calling orders. Elian watched her go, then looked back toward Mara. Elian said, do you want me to look at crew readiness? Mara said, not yet. I want you to watch, and if someone approaches you with a suggestion, I want to know. Do you understand? Elian gave a slight nod. I understand. The pad hummed, the pumps pushed, and the leak stayed small, like it was waiting for something. The air itself seemed to hold its breath under the lights. 3 levels up in a secure room, a conference call opened with polite voices and hard edges. Mara could not hear it yet, but she could feel it in the way people began to glance at the cameras and the clocks. A message came to her tablet from a restricted channel, and it looked routine at first. The message read, Compliance review requested. Provide status update within 10 minutes. Mara stared at the words, because she did not like the phrase compliance review. It meant someone had pulled a lever that did not belong on the pad. Cade leaned in. Who is calling you? Mara said, people who do not touch hardware. They touch permission. Elian asked, do you want me there? Mara said, no. If they want a doctor, they can request one, and you stay here. Mara walked toward the small field office near the stairs. The air inside smelled like coffee and plastic, and a screen showed the countdown clock for the rehearsal sequence. With numbers that felt like a blade. She accepted the call, and a calm voice filled the room. The voice said, Commander Vance, we are seeing anomalies. We need assurance that this remains within acceptable risk. Mara kept her tone flat. We have identified an engineered leak path, we are isolating and inspecting, and we are on schedule. Another voice joined, sharper than the first. On schedule is not a justification. We can terminate the rehearsal now and reschedule. Mara did not flinch. Reschedule means a 30-day slip, and that changes the mission window and the crew readiness plan. Mara continued, if you want to do that, say you want it, and do not pretend it is about safety. Silence came, short and loaded. The calm voice returned, almost sympathetic. The calm voice said, we are offering a compromise. We continue, but you accept an oversight protocol, temporary, and it gives us assurance. Mara felt the trap closing. Describe it. The calm voice said, it places a monitoring team inside your decision chain. They can pause operations if thresholds are exceeded. Mara's eyes narrowed. And who defines the thresholds? The sharper voice said, the board does. It is standard. Mara let the silence stretch until she could hear her own breathing. Then she spoke without heat. Mara said, this is not standard. This is an attempt to take my authority during a critical window. The calm voice sounded almost patient. Commander, we want success, and we also want accountability. Mara said, accountability is earned after action, not used to block it. She ended the call without asking permission. Outside, the pad lights burned on, and the leak continued to drift like a white whisper. Cade met her as she stepped out. Bad news? Mara said, predictable news. They want a hand on my brake pedal. Cade's mouth tightened. I can block their people from entering the pad. Mara said, they do not need to enter. They can pause from a screen. Elian approached, eyes alert. Commander, 2 technicians just asked me if I would support a stand down on medical grounds. Mara's gaze sharpened. Who asked you? Elian named them, and Mara did not recognize the names, but the pattern mattered. She kept her voice even. Mara asked, what did you say? Elian held her eyes. I said I have no medical basis to declare anyone unfit, and if anyone wants to claim medical risk, they should bring data, not pressure. Mara nodded once. Good. Juno returned, face tight. We found a seal that was replaced recently, and it is not in the work log. Mara said, remove it, bag it, and preserve it. Juno hesitated. Commander, if we stop to preserve evidence, we lose time. Mara looked at her. We preserve because this is not a random failure. Someone wants us to hurry past the proof. Juno's shoulders stiffened. Understood. Cade leaned closer. You think sabotage? Mara said, I think someone wants a schedule slip or a leverage point. Either way, it is sabotage. A young technician in a dark jumpsuit passed by, pushing a cart, and Mara saw the fresh badge clip again. The technician looked up, met her eyes for half a second, then looked away too quickly. Mara said softly, Cade. Cade's hand moved to his headset. On it. The technician suddenly turned and ran. The chase was not dramatic in the way movies liked, but it was fast, awkward, and full of obstacles in a maze of stairs, railings, hoses, and doors that only opened for the right badges. Cade moved like he had done this before, cutting off the technician's first route and forcing him into a narrower corridor where cameras watched every step. Mara followed behind at a controlled pace, because her job was not to catch, it was to decide what catching meant. Cade shouted, stop, now. The technician did not stop, and he shoved past a worker, nearly knocking a tool case into a stack of hoses. Mara's voice cut through the noise, low but sharp. Mara said, if you slip and damage the line, you will not survive the day. Stop. The technician flinched and slowed for one beat, just long enough for Cade to close the distance. Cade grabbed his arm and twisted him against the railing, and the technician gasped with breath hitching. Cade said, badge, now. The technician's hand trembled as he reached toward his pocket. Mara stepped closer and kept her tone steady. Mara said, do not reach for anything sharp. This is not worth dying for. The technician looked up at her, eyes wide, young enough to be used and old enough to know it. His voice cracked as he spoke. The technician said, I did not do anything. Mara studied him. Then you can tell us who asked you to. He swallowed. I do not know names. Cade tightened his grip. You know something. The technician's eyes flicked toward the far end of the corridor, where a door led into a restricted service bay. Mara saw the glance, and it was enough. Mara said, hold him, do not harm him. He is a trail, not the prize. Cade nodded, and Mara turned toward the restricted door. Inside the service bay, the air was cooler and smelled of lubricant and insulation. The lights were dimmer, and the noise of pumps became a distant thrum. Juno followed close behind. Commander, you should not go in alone. Mara did not slow. Then do not let me be alone. They moved between stacks of equipment, and a set of storage cabinets stood near a wall panel. One cabinet door was slightly ajar, like someone had rushed. Mara opened it, and inside were gloves, a small tool kit, and a sealed pouch with a label that did not match any standard inventory. The label was simple, almost elegant, like it had been printed by someone who wanted it to look official. Juno's breath caught. That is not ours. Mara lifted the pouch and felt its weight, light enough to hide and heavy enough to matter. Inside, she heard a faint rattle, like small pieces shifting. Cade's voice came through her headset. "Commander, we have the runner secured. He is talking, but he is scared." Mara said, "Bring him to the field office, and keep him away from anyone in a suit." Elian's voice came next. "I can sit with him. He is panicking." Mara said, "Do it. Calm him down, and get facts without pushing." Mara looked back at the pouch. "Juno, bag this, photograph it, and do not open it here." Juno swallowed. "Understood." Mara's eyes moved to the wall panel, where a small access mark showed it had been opened recently. The screws had tiny scratches, and the metal was warm when she touched it with the back of her fingers. Mara exhaled once. "Someone built a path, not just a leak, a path to steer us." Juno whispered, "Toward what?" Mara answered, "Quiet. Toward a choice." In the field office, Elian sat across from the young technician. The technician's hands shook, and his knee bounced like it wanted to run even while his body could not. Elian's voice stayed calm. "You are not in a medical emergency. You are in a fear emergency, and those are real, and we can manage them." The technician blinked. "They said I would be fine. They said it was a small thing." Elian nodded slowly. "Who is they?" The technician swallowed hard. "A man with an access badge. He said he was part of a review team, and he told me to swap a seal." Elian asked gently, "Did he give you a reason?" The technician whispered, "He said it was a quality test, and he said it would force us stand down." The technician continued, voice shrinking. "He said the mission needed to be delayed, and if I helped, they would make sure my sister got approved for a medical transfer." Elian's eyes narrowed with a flicker of anger that he quickly buried. "They used your family." The technician's face crumpled. "I did not want to hurt anyone." Mara stepped into the room, and she had heard enough. Her voice stayed even, and that made it worse. Mara said, "You did not want to, but you did. That does not make you a monster, it makes you a lever they pulled." The technician looked up, tears in his eyes. "Are you going to ruin me?" Mara stared at him, unreadable. "That depends on whether you help me stop the next step." He shook his head. "I do not know the next step." Mara leaned forward slightly. "You know how he contacted you, where he stood, how he looked, and what he said when he thought you were useful." The technician swallowed. "He said the leak would look normal, and it would pass until the final call. Then it would spike." Juno's voice came over the headset, urgent. "Commander, the leak just changed. It is increasing, exactly on the schedule he described." Mara's eyes went cold, and Elian looked at her like he had just watched a theory become a weapon. Elian said, "You were right. It is controlled." Mara straightened. "Juno, isolate the line now." Mara continued, "Cade, lock down every exit. No one leaves the pad zone without being seen." Cade replied, "Already in motion." Mara looked at Elian. "Stay with him, keep him breathing, and get the description." Elian nodded. Mara walked out, step steady, while the clock kept cutting away their options. The line isolation was messy and fast. A crew moved to valves that were never meant to be touched in a hurry, and Juno's voice snapped orders with precision that cut through panic. Mara stood at the edge of the work zone, watching hands move and faces tighten. Cade approached, jaw clenched. Cade said, "We have a problem. Someone tried to enter from the administrative side with a board escort tag, and my team blocked them, but the call is coming from above." Mara said, "Let them stay outside. If they push, record everything." Cade hesitated. "They can ground us." Mara's tone did not change. "They can try." Juno shouted, "Valve closed. Pressure dropping. Leak stabilizing." Mara exhaled, slow. "Good." A new message arrived on Mara's tablet from the board channel, and it carried a different weight. The message read, "Immediate termination recommended. Oversight protocol required to continue." Mara looked at the words and felt the trap become simple. If she accepted oversight, the board gained a hand inside her operation, and if she refused, they could terminate and claim safety. Either way, someone got what they wanted unless she changed the game. Mara tapped a different channel that required her personal authentication, used only in rare, ugly moments, and she sent a short directive. Her tablet showed the outgoing directive as it transmitted, "Emergency command authority invoked for rehearsal safety. Field commander retains final pause control pending evidence review." She attached the bagged seal photos, the unlogged replacement note, and the leak pattern curve that was too clean. Cade watched her. Cade said, "That is a big move." Mara replied, flat. "Big moves are cheaper than slow deaths." Cade's mouth twitched, almost a smile. That almost sounded like humor. Mara looked at him. "Do not get used to it." Hours slid by in a blur of controlled stress. The leak stabilized, then tried to climb again, and Juno kept catching it like a net catching a fish that wanted to escape. Elian returned to the pad with new information. His face was composed, but his eyes carried something sharp. Elian said, "The runner gave a description. A man with a review badge, but his shoes were wrong, new, expensive, not field, and he had a scar on his left hand like a burn from a lab accident." Mara nodded. "A designer, not a worker." Elian lowered his voice. "He also said the man used a phrase. He said, 'Your sister will be cleared if you keep the chain clean.'" Mara's eyes narrowed. "Chain clean." Juno looked up from her tablet. "That sounds like the approval chain, the decision chain." Elian added, "He did not sound like he worked for the agency. He sounded like he worked for a system outside it." Mara's voice stayed calm. "Then we are not fighting one person. We are fighting a method." A security alert flashed on Cade's screen, and he stiffened. Someone was trying to access the fueling control interface remotely, using credentials that should not exist. Cade swore under his breath, then caught himself and looked at Elian. Elian raised an eyebrow. Elian said, "Keep it professional." Cade muttered, "I am trying." Mara turned to Juno. "Can you hard isolate the control path?" Juno hesitated. "We can, but it forces manual mode, and that increases workload and risk." Mara looked at the clock, because the window was shrinking. "Do it. Manual is slower, but it cannot be steered from a keyboard." Juno nodded and moved. Elian watched Mara for a second. Elian said, "You are choosing the harder road." Mara answered, "Quiet. The easier road belongs to them." Manual mode changed everything, making every person on the pad a critical node. It made mistakes more likely, and it also made sabotage harder to hide. Juno's crew worked in pairs, checking each other, faces pale under the lights with sweat visible at temples. Mara moved among them without touching anything, because presence mattered. Cade returned with a new update. "We traced a remote access attempt to a relay point outside our network. It is masked and professional." Mara replied, "That is our designer." Elian leaned in. "Do you want me to speak to the board medical advisor? They are going to try the medical route again." Mara met his eyes. "They will, and they will use you as the blade if they can." Elian's voice was steady. "Then let me block it." Mara's eyes softened by 1 degree, not warmth, but respect. "Be careful. They will punish you later." Elian said, "Later is a luxury. People can die now." Mara nodded once. "Do it." Elian walked away with shoulders squared. Juno's voice rose from the work line. Juno said, "Commander, we have a match. The replaced seal has a micro-channel, and it is engineered, not a defect." Mara felt the pieces lock together. "Bag it, and keep the chain of custody clean." Juno gave a tight smile, grim humor. Chain clean. Understood. A message came from the board again, from a different voice that sounded smooth and almost warm. The message read, Commander Vance, you have evidence of an engineered fault. Accept the oversight protocol and we will accelerate investigation. Mara stared at the words, because support and accelerate sounded like help and moved like chains. She replied with one line that read, I will accept investigation. I will not accept control during a live window. The response came fast and blunt. The response read, then we terminate. Mara looked at the clock and felt time slow for half a breath, because she could imagine the headline and the real outcome behind it. Someone would win without stepping onto the pad. Mara sent a different message, not to the board, but to the agency director on call. She attached the evidence again, plus the remote access attempt log, plus Elian's report about coercion, then she wrote one sentence. The sentence read, this is an active coercion operation. If you terminate, you reward it. The reply came after a pause that felt long though it was only minutes. The reply read, proceed under emergency authority. I will handle the board. Mara's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Cade looked at her. Cade said, you got cover. Mara said, I got time. Cover is never permanent. Cade nodded. What now? Mara's gaze went to the rocket, tall and quiet, like a promise that could become a threat. Now we finish the rehearsal, and we find the person with the scar. The designer did not wait to be found. Near the administrative gate, a man in a crisp jacket tried to pass through with a badge that read like legitimacy. Cade's team stopped him, and the man smiled and complained, polite and practiced. Cade walked up, flanked by two guards. Cade said, Sir, your badge is not in our live registry. The man lifted his hand slightly, as if amused. Then your system is lagging. I am authorized. Cade held his gaze. Your shoes tell a different story. The man's smile thinned. That is not an argument. Mara arrived a moment later and looked at the man's left hand. A faint scar ran across the knuckles, pale against skin. Like a burn that had healed badly. Mara's voice was calm. You are not here to help. The man's eyes flicked to her badge, then to her face, and recognition turned into calculation. His tone stayed smooth. The man said, Commander Vance, I did not expect you on the pad. Most commanders watch from a screen. Mara replied, I prefer reality. It lies less. The man smiled. Reality can be arranged. Cade stepped closer. We are detaining you for questioning. The man's smile vanished. You cannot detain me. You do not understand who will call you. Mara looked at him. Call them. I will still be here. The man's jaw tightened, and for the first time he looked like someone who had misjudged the room. Cade moved, and the man tried to step back, but a guard blocked him. Mara leaned slightly toward him. Her voice dropped. Mara said, you used a family member as leverage. That is sloppy. It leaves fingerprints. The man's eyes hardened. Human compassion is predictable. That is why it is controllable. Mara answered, quiet. No. It is why you lose. Cade cuffed him and led him away. Juno's voice came through the headset, urgent but controlled. Juno said, Commander, we are at the final fueling call point. The system is stable. We can proceed. Mara turned back toward the rocket. Proceed. The rehearsal completed because Mara refused to let someone else write the ending. The vehicle drank fuel, the lines held, and the sky above the pad stayed clear. In the control room, people exhaled like they had been holding their breath for hours. Some smiled, some stared at screens in disbelief, and Mara did not celebrate because she watched for the second move. Elian approached when the noise settled, tired but steady. The board medical advisor called me directly. He tried to get me to sign a readiness hold, and I refused. Mara nodded. They will remember. Elian held her gaze. So will I. For a moment, the space between them carried something warm, restrained like a flame sheltered from wind. Mara cut it clean with her next words. Mara said, go eat. Sleep if you can. We launch for real soon. Elian's mouth twitched slightly. Commander, that sounded like concern. Mara stared at him. Do not push your luck. Elian gave a small nod and walked away. Cade approached with a file. Cade said, we have the designer in custody. His name is Arden Vale, not a government employee, and contracted through a shell network that points to a consortium. Mara's eyes narrowed. A system buyer. Cade nodded. He will not talk easily. Mara said, he does not have to. We already saw his method. Cade hesitated. Commander, what if the method has a second stage? Mara's gaze moved upward, toward the moon hanging faintly beyond the glare. It does. 2 days later, the real launch day arrived, and the air around the pad felt different. It felt less like routine and more like a knife edge. Mara stood in the crew access corridor with white walls and bright lights, smelling clean air systems mixed with faint antiseptic. She watched her crew strap in one by one, faces calm because fear was private among professionals. Juno's voice came through her headset. All systems nominal. Cade's voice followed. Security perimeter is sealed. No anomalies. Elian's voice came last. Crew medically ready. Mara sat in her seat with hands on her thighs and eyes forward, breathing steady. In the control room, the countdown continued. The engines ignited, the rocket climbed, and Earth fell away beneath them in a rush of light and vibration. Mara felt the pull in her chest, the pressure in her spine, and the harsh beauty of controlled violence that did not need blood to be deadly. She did not speak until first stage separation, and then she said one quiet line. Keep it clean. Juno's voice in her ear was tight with relief. Copy. Hours later, as Earth became a curved blue presence and space became the main environment, a small alert flickered on Mara's internal display. The internal display showed a line that read, Navigation Corridor Advisory, External Constraints Detected. Mara's eyes narrowed. Say that again. Juno's voice changed, sharper. We are receiving route constraints that do not match mission planning. It looks like a corridor is being forced on us. Mara felt the second stage arrive, right on time. She kept her hands still, because panic always showed up first in the fingers. By the time the spacecraft approached the moon, the trap had a shape. It was not a wall you could see, it was a tightening net of safe routes that were suddenly no longer safe. Juno's voice stayed controlled, but tension lived under it. We are getting a pattern of warning zones labeled debris risk, radiation risk, thermal risk, and it is too complete, too curated. Cade's voice came through, strained. We are seeing a remote platform emitting a signal, not ours, near the corridor entry. Elian asked, can it harm us directly? Juno answered, it does not need to. It only needs to force us into a narrow path. Mara stared at the moon, gray and ancient, filling the window. The landscape looked calm, and the trap did not. Mara asked, voice flat. Who owns the platform? Cade replied, we are tracing. It is masked behind commercial layers, and it smells like the same network that funded Arden Vale. Mara nodded. A buyer. They lost control on the ground, so they moved the control point into space. A new communications channel opened in Mara's headset, uninvited. A voice came through, smooth, confident, distant. The voice said, Commander Vance, congratulations on launch. You handled the ground disturbance well. Mara did not answer at first, and the voice continued. Its patience sounded like a calculation. The voice said, near the moon, systems become expensive. Mistakes become permanent. We can help you avoid mistakes. Mara replied, you can stop speaking now. A soft chuckle came back. We are not here to harm you. We are here to ensure compliance with resource governance. Mara's eyes stayed cold. Speak plain. The voice obliged. You will deliver a sealed data package after lunar flyby. In return, your corridor remains open. Refuse, and your corridor becomes unsafe. Elian's voice was low. They are holding the route hostage. Mara did not move. What is in the package? The voice paused, then answered. A record of the ground incident. Your evidence. Your emergency authority invocation. The chain that proves sabotage. Mara understood, and she did not let her face show it. They wanted fingerprints erased, and they wanted the story to become fog. Mara asked one careful question. Why do you need it? The voice answered, because systems survive by controlling narratives. Mara replied, quiet. Then you chose the wrong human. The first encounter with the corridor hunters appeared as small movements on Juno's sensor display. They were not missiles, not obvious weapons, but pursuit craft positioned to herd. Juno said, they are placing themselves at the edges of the path. If we drift, they push us back with radiation warnings and collision risk. Cade's tone tightened. They are not firing. They are shaping. Elian asked, can they board us? Cade replied, not easily. But they can force a failure and call it an accident. Mara watched their pattern and felt the logic behind it. It was clean, designed, and it expected humans to behave like humans. Mara said, Juno, what is the cost to take a different path? Juno hesitated. Fuel, heat, stress. We can do it, but it will push limits. Mara nodded. Then we do it. We do not let them steer. Elian's voice softened, almost pleading. Commander, if you push too hard, someone could get hurt. Mara replied, someone will get hurt either way. I choose the hurt I can control. Juno said, understood. Planning burn. The hunters adjusted as if they sensed her choice, movements almost graceful like wolves shifting to cut off prey. Mara watched them and felt cold clarity. They were good. She would need to be better. The first burn was tight and uncomfortable. Space was not cinematic, it was math and heat, and the vehicle creaked like a living thing under strain. Juno's voice stayed crisp. Burn complete. We are off their preferred line. Cade corrected himself as he spoke. We are outside their net. Elian asked, how bad is the stress? Juno answered, within limits, but closer than I like. Mara said, closer is still within. A warning chimed, and the internal display presented sterile language that made it worse. The internal display showed lines that read, thermal load rising. Control surfaces adapting. Mara watched the numbers, then looked out at the moon's edge. The hunters shifted again, persistent like they had all day, because in space-time belonged to whoever could afford it. A new message came from the smooth voice. You are making this expensive, Commander. Do not confuse stubbornness with strength. Mara replied, do not confuse money with power. The voice chuckled. Humans love that story. Mara's face did not change. I do not love stories. I love outcomes. For the first time, the voice went quiet. Elian looked at Mara, eyes searching her expression. Elian said, you are not afraid. Mara answered without looking at him. I am afraid. I just do not waste it. Elian's voice lowered. That is the most honest thing you have said all week. Mara glanced at him, and the hard shell softened by a hair. Then Juno spoke again, urgent. Juno said, Commander, the platform is changing the corridor map. They are shifting risk zones in real time. The rules are changing. Mara's eyes went cold again. Of course they are. The rule change hit when the corridor narrowed around the far side of the moon. Signal from Earth weakened as the lunar body blocked it, and the world became smaller, quieter, more dangerous. Juno's voice was tight. We are entering communications shadow. Their platform still has line of sight. They planned this. Cade said, they want us isolated. Elian asked, can we keep a relay? Juno replied, not with their interference. They are flooding the band, and it is noise with intent. Mara's hand stayed still. Then we operate alone. Outside, the moon's surface slid below them, cratered and gray, a landscape that did not care about human plans. Inside, the air felt thinner in a psychological way, because isolation did that. Elian's voice softened. Commander, if we do not report back, people will assume worst case. Mara replied, let them assume. We will give them facts later. A sensor alert flashed, and one hunter moved closer, too close, forcing a collision risk warning. Juno's voice tightened. Juno said, they are pushing. They want us to break or burn. Mara watched the hunter's vector, precise and confident. Her voice stayed low. Mara said, they think we will take the safe option they provided. Cade asked, what do you want? Mara answered, I want the option they did not price. Juno hesitated. Commander, that is the high-stress path. Mara replied, then we pay stress. Elian's voice rose slightly. You are going to hurt the vehicle. Mara's answer was calm. Better than letting them hurt the crew. Silence passed, and then Juno spoke with commitment. Burn in 30 seconds. Mara closed her eyes for a brief moment, not to pray, not to hope, but to focus. She opened them, and the countdown continued. The second burn was harsher, pushing them into a trajectory marked as unstable. Warning spiked in sterile language, and the cabin vibrated like it wanted to complain. Juno's voice stayed steady. We are through. They missed the lock. Cade exhaled. That was close. Mara replied, close means we still have choices. A small tremor ran through the vehicle, not catastrophic but real. Elian's voice tightened. Elian said, we felt that. What? Was it? Juno answered, thermal flex. It will settle, but it is telling us we cannot do that many times. Mara nodded. We will not. We will end this. The smooth voice returned, less amused. You are willing to break your own craft to keep your pride. That is irrational. Mara replied, it is rational. You just do not like the math. The voice paused. Deliver the package. You can still make this simple. Mara's eyes narrowed. You want evidence erased. The voice answered, we want stability. Mara replied, quiet. Stability built on coercion is not stability. It is a hostage situation. The voice's warmth vanished. Then you will learn what it costs. A new alert flashed, and Mara's internal display presented another line. The internal display showed a line that read, clearance review pending. Crew medical status flagged. Elian's breath caught. They are tagging me. Mara's gaze snapped to him. How? Elian's voice was tense. They are pushing a clearance hold based on stress risk. They want to declare me unfit to continue after the flyby operations. Juno's voice rose. That is impossible. We are mid-mission. Cade said, they do not need it to be logical. They need it to be official. Mara felt the leverage point shift from hardware to human, exactly as she had predicted on the pad. She turned slightly toward Elian, voice steady. Mara said, they chose you because you matter to decisions. Elian swallowed. Do I? Mara did not answer directly. Stay steady. Breathe. Do not give them panic data. Elian's voice softened. Commander, that is your version of comfort. Mara's mouth twitched by a fraction. It is the only version I trust. The corridor tightened again as they emerged from the moon's shadow. Earth signal returned in fragments, weak and distorted, while the platform signal stayed clean. Juno spoke fast. We have a limited window before the hunters close again. If we want to transmit evidence out, it has to be now, but the channel is dirty. Cade added, if we transmit, they will know. Mara stared at the sealed data package in the compartment beside her seat. It was a small object with a large weight. Elian's voice was low. If you give them the package, they erase your proof. They keep doing this. Mara's eyes stayed forward. If I refuse, they try to break us. Elian asked, what do you want to do? Mara answered, quiet. I want to win without lying. Juno said, we can split the data. Cade asked, how? Juno replied, we send a compressed proof slice to multiple public channels, not full logs, just enough to make denial costly. Cade hesitated. That is risky. Mara said, everything is. Elian looked at Mara. If you do that, they will come after you personally. Mara's voice stayed flat. They already are. Mara added, dry and minimal. At least now they are earning it. Cade let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. That was one of your 3 jokes, right? Mara replied, do not count. Juno began the transmission process, hands moving fast. The data was sliced, stripped of details that would endanger people, and shaped into proof that showed pattern, coercion, and the presence of an external platform shaping a corridor. Mara watched the send indicator crawl, and each second felt like a step on thin ice. Then the signal went out into the messy world of networks and eyes. Juno whispered, sent. Mara exhaled once. Good. The smooth voice returned, edged with anger. You just made this public. Mara replied, you made it necessary. The hunters reacted with speed, surging forward and closing vectors like jaws. Juno's voice sharpened. Juno said, they are attempting a forced proximity event, not a strike, a shove. Cade's hands tightened on his harness. They want to trigger a collision warning so intense we have to break into their corridor. Elian asked, can we outmaneuver? Juno replied, we can, but fuel is tight. Mara scanned the display geometry and the intent behind it. The net was designed to make every choice expensive. Mara said, they are not trying to kill us. They are trying to make us choose surrender. Elian said, surrender is safer. Mara glanced at him. Safer for who? Elian's throat moved, and he did not answer. Mara turned back to Juno. Mara said, give me the path that hurts the vehicle but saves the crew. Juno hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. I have one. It is tight, it spikes thermal load, and it pushes us near the upper band. Mara said, do it. Cade asked, Commander, if this fails, what is our fallback? Mara answered, calm as stone. We do not need fallback. We need follow-through. Juno began the burn. Sequence. Elian's voice softened, almost intimate. Elian said, you always talk like that when you are scared. Mara did not look at him. No. I talk like that when everyone else needs a spine. Elian whispered, and when do you get one for yourself? Mara's voice turned quiet. I already have it. The burn hit, the craft shuddered, heat rose, and warnings blinked. The hunters missed by a margin that felt like a breath. Juno exhaled. We are through their bite. Cade's voice was rough. We are running out of room. Mara stared at the moon shrinking behind them. Then we finish before the room runs out. Earth communication strengthened as they moved away from the far side geometry. Messages arrived delayed and fragmented, but real, and mission control requested status while leadership demanded explanation. The board sent a cold note about unauthorized data release, and Mara ignored most of it. She responded to only one channel, the director who had given her cover. Her message read, "We are returning. Evidence is partially public. External platform interference confirmed. Hunters observed." The reply came short and clear. The reply read, "Understood. Survive. We will fight the rest here." Mara felt something like relief, not because the fight was over, but because she was not alone in it. Then Elian's clearance hold alert changed again, and it escalated. His display presented a line that read, "Medical authority suspended pending review. Flight surgeon to be relieved after flyby." Elian stared at it, face calm but eyes darkening. "They are cutting me out." Mara's voice stayed controlled. "They cannot relieve you in space." Elian replied, "They can after. They can make me disappear into paperwork." Juno's voice softened. "They are making you the price." Mara's jaw tightened because she saw the leverage play. They could not control her directly anymore, so they would control what mattered around her. Elian looked at Mara. "Commander, if you hand them the sealed package now, maybe they stop." Mara's eyes snapped to him. "Do not offer yourself as a ransom." Elian's voice rose slightly. "I am not offering. I am acknowledging reality." Mara stared at him for a long second, and the air between them held the rift. Then she spoke in the only way she trusted. Mara said, "Reality is shaped by choices. That is the only reason any of us are up here." Elian's shoulders lowered. "A little. And what is your choice?" Mara looked at the sealed package and let the meaning settle. Then she said one line. Mara said, "We trade something else." The final stretch back toward Earth was not peaceful, but the hunters did not press as hard. The data release had changed their risk calculus, and public attention was a blade that cut both ways. The smooth voice returned once more, colder than before. "Commander Vance, you have embarrassed powerful people. That is not wise." Mara replied, "Wisdom is what people call fear after it learns to speak politely." The voice paused. "You will lose your protections. You will lose your career." Mara answered, "Quiet. I can replace a career." The voice sharpened. "You cannot replace him." Mara felt her throat tighten because the voice touched the right nerve. Elian heard it too, and he looked at her, not asking for romance, asking for truth. Mara did not give him speeches. She opened a secure channel to the director and requested a single action. Her message read, "Immediate protective custody and whistleblower shield for flight surgeon Dr. Elian Cross. Attach threat pattern and coercion evidence." The director replied after a tense pause. The reply read, "Approved. It will be ugly. But approved." Mara closed her eyes for a brief second. Elian watched her, searching. Elian asked, "What did you just do?" Mara opened her eyes. "I moved you out of their grip." Elian's voice softened. "At what cost?" Mara stared forward. "We will see." Elian swallowed. "Commander, that was not nothing." Mara replied, "Minimal. Do not make it a speech." Elian's mouth twitched, a small smile. "Understood." Re-entry was violent in its own quiet way. The craft hit air, heat blooming across its shield, and plasma flickered outside like a storm you could not hear. Mara felt gravity return, heavy and honest. The world pressed on her body, reminding her that space was never free. Juno's voice was tight. Thermal stable. Cade's voice sounded like he had to push it out. Trajectory good. Elian's voice was steady. Crew stable. The plasma faded, the sky returned, and the ocean appeared below, wide and indifferent. They splashed down hard, water slapped the hull, and the craft bobbed, alive and real. For a moment, no one spoke, and the silence was full of aftershock and relief. Then Cade let out a breath and spoke. Like he needed to hear it. Cade said, "We are still attached to our heads." Mara looked at him. "That is your joke, not mine." Cade laughed once, short. "Fair." Recovery teams approached, and the hatch opened with salty air rushing in. Mara stepped out into sunlight that looked too bright after space. On the deck of the recovery ship, officials waited, and cameras waited behind them. Mara saw faces she recognized from the board, security personnel she did not recognize, and a person in a simple jacket standing slightly apart, watching her with calm eyes. The director's envoy. The system was already moving. On the recovery ship, a private room was set aside for debrief. It smelled of clean metal and coffee, and Mara sat across from two officials. One was a board representative with a practiced smile. The other was the envoy, face unreadable. The board representative spoke first. "Commander Vance, your unauthorized data release has created instability. We will need to evaluate consequences." Mara's voice stayed flat. "Evaluate sabotage first." The board representative's smile tightened. "We have evaluated. The matter is being handled." Mara leaned forward slightly. "Handled by whom?" The representative replied, smooth. "By the appropriate governance bodies." Mara stared at him. "Those bodies tried to take control during a critical window. That is not governance. That is coercion." The representative's eyes cooled. "Careful. Words have consequences." Mara replied, quiet. "So do actions." The envoy finally spoke. "Commander, the director has approved protective custody for Dr. Elian Cross. He is being transferred off this ship under secure escort, and the board cannot touch him without a public fight." The board representative's face twitched. "That is an overreach." Mara looked at the envoy. "And me?" The envoy paused. "You are still useful, but you will be isolated. Expect audits, expect reassignment, and expect pressure." Mara nodded once. "Understood." The board representative leaned in. "You could avoid some of that by cooperating. Deliver the sealed package, close the matter, and keep your future." Mara stared at him, then asked a single question. "If I deliver it, do you stop?" The representative smiled faintly. "We restore stability." Mara's voice stayed calm. "You restore silence." The representative's smile vanished. "Commander." Mara stood up. Meeting over. Elian was escorted through a side corridor away from cameras, and Mara caught him for a moment near a hatch where the ship noise turned. Muffled. He looked tired, but his posture was steady. Elian said, "They are moving fast." Mara replied, "That is how systems survive." Elian held her gaze. "You moved me out of their grip." Mara's face stayed hard. "Do not confuse that with safety." Elian nodded. "I am not naive. But I am grateful." Mara looked away briefly, then back. "Gratitude is wasted if you do nothing with it." Elian's voice softened. "Then tell me what to do." Mara answered, quiet. "Stay clean. Speak when you must. Do not let them rewrite you into a problem." Elian swallowed. "And you?" Mara's eyes stayed cold, with faint heat beneath it. "I will be fine." Elian did not accept that. "That is not an answer, is it?" Mara's jaw tightened because emotional questions demanded truth without tools. She gave him the only truth she could tolerate. Mara said, "I will keep moving. That is how I survive." Elian held her gaze for a long second, then nodded once like a promise. The escort called his name. Elian stepped back, then said one last thing, low. "Commander, you do not have to carry everything alone." Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. "I know." He left, and Mara stood there for a moment listening to the ship, feeling time pass in slow waves. Days later, in a quiet office far from the ocean, Mara received her reassignment. It was framed as a promotion and felt like exile. She was placed into a compliance oversight role, away from hardware, away from crews, away from launch pads, and they wanted her behind glass. Cade visited her once, leaning against the doorframe like he did not belong in clean rooms. Cade said, "They are trying to park you." Mara replied, "They are trying to keep me from touching reality." Cade held up a small drive. "I pulled this from the designer's tool kit before it disappeared into evidence storage. It is not a full log, just a signature pattern, and it points to a platform builder." Mara took it, feeling its tiny weight. Cade added what mattered most. Cade said, "It is not the board. It is the consortium behind them, the one buying stability." Mara stared at the drive. "They do not stop." Cade shook his head. "No, but now they have a problem. People saw your proof, and people asked questions." Mara's face did not change, but something inside her aligned. "Then we give them better questions." Cade hesitated. "Are you building a case?" Mara looked at him. "I am building a path." Cade's mouth twitched. "You really cannot stop." Mara replied, dry and minimal. "Stopping is not in my skill set." Cade laughed once, then sobered. "Dr. Cross is under protection. He sent a message and said he is ready when you are." Mara's throat tightened, and she hated it. She nodded once. Mara said, "Tell him to wait. Not forever. Just long enough." Cade studied her. "You care." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Do not say that like it is a weakness." Cade shrugged. "It is a target. That is all." Mara looked at the drive again, then out the window at a pale sky. The system had tried to trap her in silence, and it had failed. The final message arrived on a channel Mara did not recognize. It was short and almost polite, and it read, "We saw your broadcast. We priced your defiance. The price will rise." Mara stared at it for a long moment, then typed one reply. The reply read, "Raise it. I am still cheaper than your collapse." She sent it and powered the device down. On the desk beside her sat the sealed package, still unopened, still intact. She had not delivered it, and she had not surrendered it. She also had not kept it safe, not fully, because pieces of it were already in the world where denial would hurt. Mara stood up, pulled on her jacket, and walked out of the office. Outside, somewhere beyond Earth's sky, the moon kept turning, silent and indifferent. Far beyond that, in the dark between systems, buyers of stability kept building corridors. Mara intended to break them. After the ocean calmed and the cameras went away, Mara Vance stayed exactly the same. She did not celebrate, she did not explain herself, and she just kept moving, because she understood something most people never see until it is too late. In space, the danger is not always fire or impact. Sometimes the real trap is permission, a corridor that looks safe, a voice that sounds reasonable, a system that says it is protecting you while it quietly decides what you are allowed to survive. Mara did not beat that system with speeches. She beat it with choices, with cost, and with the one kind of courage that cannot be outsourced. And somewhere beyond the moon, in the dark where no floodlight reaches, new corridors are already being built. If you felt that pressure, if you caught that quiet human anger under the calm, you are going to want the next chapter. If you want more stories like this, hit like, share it with someone who loves hard science fiction thrillers, and subscribe to the channel. New episodes keep coming, and each one goes deeper into the kind of future that could actually happen.